Hey everyone, my name is Mark. I'm the business lead for PT around application security. And today we're going to be talking about our PT application security products and how we integrate them around software delivery lifecycle. Positive Technologies is a software vendor focused on cybersecurity solutions. We've been around for a while, for around 22 years. We almost have around 2,000 employees, and we have done a lot of major application security transformation in the past couple of years. Today I'll share a couple of our main areas of expertise and the products that we offer to support that. We'll begin talking about what is application security. AppSec is not primarily just about the products, it's not about particular technologies, it's really about the process around writing, deploying, delivering your software to your customers and making sure you do that in the most secure and cost-effective way. Application security is not just about integrating a particular tool, it's really looking at your entire software delivery lifecycle, where from the second you write your code to when you deploy it to your customers, and how are you testing, validating, and fixing security vulnerabilities along the way. Why application security is important? Over the past couple decades, we went from focusing on protecting the perimeter of your organizations to focusing on protecting the application due to the change of how your customers are interacting with our clients. Now you have hybrid work environments, you have a lot of web applications that are customer facing, and all of those have application security vulnerabilities that can be exploited by various bad actors, not necessarily from the inside of your infrastructure, but from the outside in. And that's why it's important to focus on the application level as well. AppSec can be boiled down to three main categories: process, technology, and people. Application security starts from the process. It's important to understand what you're doing today to build and deliver your application to your customers, how your developers are writing code, testing code, how it's going to the appropriate channels of validation, and then how it's going to your customers. From the next pieces of technology that powers the identification of vulnerabilities that are integrated inside of the process that you establish. And of course, like everything, people are at the center of it all. We need to make sure that people understand how to use application security solutions within the process, how they interact between various departments like security teams and developers, how to make sure that they seamlessly get each other's goals complete. Application security is the technology that is powered and inside of the DevSecOps framework. Really, the DevSecOps talks about the methodology around how security teams, developers, and operation teams interact with each other. Security should be integrated at every single point and encapsulate that process. It also talks about the correlation and the way security teams and developers interact with each other. If we look 10 years, if you look at 10 years ago, we would see that developers would write their code, security teams would look at it sometimes months after, identify vulnerabilities, have to go back to the developers. It's a very costly process that creates bottlenecks, creates confusion and distrust between teams. So people came up with a framework, which first started with DevOps to look at your development processes, and then was translated into DevSecOps that encapsulated the security inside of this process. And today we're going to be talking about the PT application security products that power that. A little bit about the definition. So what are we talking about? Application security consists of various technologies. Number one is SAST scanning, which is your static application security testing. Number two is SCA, software composition analysis. Then we go into container security, self-explanatory. Then we have DAST, which is dynamic application security testing. And from our perspective, we also included a WAF, which is a web application firewall, which encapsulates everything together. All of these technologies are worked together to get you the right signal and understanding of what type of vulnerabilities you actually have within your application and what needs to be fixed urgently or sometime in the future. Key example, real-world example about what application security vulnerabilities are. Imagine you have a publicly facing website. Imagine that website has a login page. Your customers interact with your service through some type of login interface. During that interface, you are asking for a username and password. Usually, in the back end, your application interacts with a database. Your database includes all of your users that interact with your systems. Various bad actors, if application vulnerabilities exist, can trick the system so that they are able to log in not just with their credentials, but with an admin credential or an elevated account that gives them access not just to their application, but in most cases, and the worst case scenario, is to have access to all information from your particular organization. So in this particular case, we can see how during the login, in the login field, we've included a particular SQL command that was able to trick the system in giving us admin access. This is specifically a vulnerability that exists in many web applications today that does get exploited on a daily and weekly basis. Integration options. What are we talking about? We have application security tools. There comes in different shapes and sizes, different technology types. What are we talking about when we say integrating inside of the SDLC? Sometimes we begin with the most basic one. We have a tool, we have code, we scan the code with a particular tool, get the results, and then act on the results. This is basically what we have done before during disjointed teams. Creates bottlenecks. It's usually just good enough for POCs or pilots. It does not really cut for today's modern and fast-paced environment. So what we're looking at SDLC integration, which mainly revolves around CI/CD in your continuous integration, continuous deployment process, aka your Jenkins, your GitLab, your GitHub pipelines. What that means is we're looking about how to integrate all of these solutions inside of the process that you currently have around the software delivery lifecycle. Here's one example. There is no one-size-fits-all solution for all customers, but mainly something revolves around this line. This is an example about how a developer walks into the morning, takes a ticket from their Jira board, writes some code inside of an IDE, for example VS Code, and pushes that code into a feature branch. This follows a general Git flow approach where all code has to go through a feature branch and then get added into, and then get merged through a pull request or merge request to the develop branch. At this stage, the best place to start integrating AppSec is at the PR stage. This is where your new code that is developed for this particular feature gets tested for security vulnerabilities. For our particular case, this means PT Application Inspector, which is our SAST and SCA offer, and also PT Container Security, which looks at your container files, which are your Docker files and your Kubernetes manifests. We have a quality gate right next to it, but in most cases it's not just a yes or no quality gate that sends the tickets back to developers. We don't want to be just bombarding and spamming our developers with every single ticket that happens, because the problem of application security and problem of the game is false positives. All of these tools are looking at use various technologies to find vulnerabilities, and unfortunately sometimes you do identify some that are not critical to business at the given point. At PT, we focus on ensuring we minimize as much as we can, and at the quality gate level, this is where programmatically we can identify and analyze all of the vulnerabilities that were found using a SAST, an SCA, and a container security scan, which ones have to be prioritized and fixed before the next release. At this stage, we can send appropriate signal to the developer who wrote that code, to the appropriate management who needs to care about that, and notify security to make sure that they know exactly what's happening within their security business risk. Once you go through that first hurdle, once your code is now living in your dev branches, you want to make sure that you start testing dynamically, because you now have a URL that you can hit. While you're doing your QA testing, unit testing, integration testing, it's the best idea to also start testing your application dynamically. We take an endpoint, we look at your authentication methods, and we start attacking from the outside in perspective to identify what type of vulnerabilities they might have. A dynamic scan is only as good as the profiles that exist within it. At PT, we have a huge team of experts that work diligently on figuring out what type of hacking profiles and hacking scenarios that we see in the industry exist today. We translate them into profiles and we upload them into black box. So you constantly have an up-to-date database of most up-to-date vulnerability data that we're testing your application against. Once you go through, that's when the next stage is you want to look at your change management process. This is for various regulatory, for audit purposes. You want to ensure that you properly test, save the results, and accept the business risk if necessary while you're deploying your application to production. This is where we can rescan your code, we can integrate with various third-party change management solutions and ensure that we save the results, the appropriate people are notified, and we approve the build to go to production with all of the business risk accepted, or hopefully none at all. Once your application hits production, that's where we have a web application firewall that starts protecting your application in production, ensuring that there is no misuse of your application, and also the vulnerable pieces of your application that still might exist due to the time to remediate a factor are still protected during from a web application standpoint, web application firewall. Operationally, AppSec is really the hardest piece of this. If you start from the wrong foot, it can delay this process by multiple years. If you start, if there is going to be distrust between security teams and development teams, this can really stall the process. So number one, it's really about establishing the process, ensuring that we understand what developers care about, which is getting more features to your customers as fast as possible, being competitive, understanding security teams. Security teams may want to make sure that the business risk of their infrastructure is reduced to the most capacity, or we're going towards it. Understanding the priority of each team, we establish the process with the right tooling, the right automation to ensure we understand the goals of each parties. Then, based on that, we go through tool integration. We focus on what tools are missing, what tools currently exist, what needs to be integrated in that particular customer's environment. This is where we're looking at your SAST, SCA, DAST, container security, understanding at one point do they need to be integrated for that particular organization. As I mentioned, the standard that I showed before, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Every customer is different. Every customer can have from 1 to 10 different Git environments or other platforms that they use. It's really important to understand the baseline, understand where we are today, where the company is going through technology advancements, and where they're going from a standardization perspective, and figure out what tools need to be introduced and integrated at each particular point to support the customer's desire to move faster in the market. Once you go through the initial hump of getting and scanning your first applications, you will see that there's a lot of vulnerabilities that get identified that were neglected or were not found for the past couple of years. This is where a huge, there has to be a process in place for you to go through the initial vulnerability cleanup and really figuring out the security debt that you have within your environment. Before doing that, we won't be able to do anything else around quality gate or automation before you clean up your initial vulnerability list that gets identified. Once you figure out your vulnerabilities, once you start cleaning them up, it's a perfect opportunity to start integrating inside of your CI/CD process. This is where we're going to be looking at a particular DevOps and DevSecOps frameworks, figuring out what's missing, figure out what and where needs to be integrated, and building out those integrations. This also looks very different for many customers. This can be one CI/CD solution, this could be many. This could be a security master pipeline. This could be per application team basis. Again, very different for every customer, but the solutions we have and with the frameworks that we have, we can figure out the best solution for each. The next one is culture improvement. It's application security will have to make sure that each parties adapt to the new process. Security teams would have to let go of the process a little bit. They have to make sure they understand the development teams about their priorities and their day-to-day processes. But also development teams. Developers usually want to build more software, they want to deliver new features, they want to work on cutting-edge technology. But they also understand that security is important, and for us we need to make sure that we automate and give them the tools for them to be successful around security without jeopardizing their real goal, which is creating new features. All of that is really what DevSecOps talks about. When we're going to our customers and talking about AppSec, we understand that and focus AppSec processes around the developer experience and developer happiness. And number 6 is enabling quality gates. We do have features to enable them very quickly, but a lot of organizations go through a series of phases to get to an ideal quality gate that works for their environment. This means number 1 is, first of all, developing and figuring out the controls that need to be in place to enable a quality gate. This also means that how to phase in the notification process. So number 1, for developers to get notified but not to stop the builds. We need to make sure the vulnerability cleanup is there, and eventually get to a point where we can actually enable quality gates holistically within the organization, where the security team is happy and development team is also satisfied that they're not stopping every single build and they can perform their day-to-day activities. All of these 6 phases really get us closer to the ideal DevSecOps environment. This focuses on the correlation and the integration of different teams. It makes sure that you're scanning and identifying your business risk, and developers are happy they can fix vulnerabilities as they come at the cheapest time for the business. So positive technology, positive technologies, we have 4 main products, as I kind of mentioned throughout my presentation, that really power the technology that I talked about. PT Application Inspector talks about our static application security testing and software composition analysis. We'll look at your source code that your developers wrote. We're also looking at your open source libraries. I want to kind of go deeper a little bit in the software composition analysis. We actually perform a series of validations and checks throughout your application to identify not just the packages you're using, but also which components of those packages you're using, and if you're using the vulnerable components. This significantly reduces the number of false positives and reduces the number of critical vulnerabilities that have to go to your developers urgently. Static application security testing part within PTAI has an additional feature. Our commitment to reduce the false positives led us to develop a feature where we are testing SAST identified vulnerabilities using a dynamic scan. We ensure that we validate if this vulnerability actually exists to significantly reduce the criticality aspect of particular vulnerabilities. We do have an IDE plugin as well, which is the best and cheapest time to fix vulnerabilities. It gives developers immediate feedback to their code around if they're creating vulnerabilities in that particular function or that particular line. We move on a little bit to container security, which has 3 main components. Number 1, we'll look at your container files, which is Docker files, and we're also looking at Kubernetes manifest. We're looking at misconfigurations, we're looking at root access that might exist, or various elevated permissions that you're giving, or maybe misuse of container configuration. We then can test the actual container images to ensure that they have been built correctly and there's no vulnerabilities that arose from the image perspective. And we also integrate with the admissions controller to ensure that we look at your runtime container environment to identify various vulnerabilities that exist inside of your Kubernetes environment. Moving along, we now have PT Blackbox, which is our dynamic application security testing tool. This takes an outside-in approach. It takes a URL, it takes your authentication method, and tries to attack based on a series of profiles your application and validate if there's vulnerable components or vulnerable ins inside of your application that through which we can go through and find vulnerabilities, and your bad actors can exploit them. And we finish off with the web application firewall, where we are typically creating rules around eliminating access to your application depending on where your customer should not be reaching. But also, as I mentioned earlier, we have an integration from PTAI to ensure that for certain types of vulnerabilities, we can close access to that pieces of code through a web application firewall. That significantly reduces the criticality to fix the vulnerability today. It gives the runway for your developers in time to fix it while you're still protected in production. So where the industry is going, it's very important to understand that all of the tools that we talked about are talking about the same application, that when we're scanning from different angles, all of those are talking about the same type of vulnerability. So it's really, really important to amalgamate all of those results together and figure out what exactly are the issues. If 3 tools are talking about the same type of vulnerability, there's only one place you need to fix it. We understand that problem. We've went to many implementations to figure out solutions that might work for various customers. We at PT understand that problem and work diligently in the future to ensure that our products support where the industry is going. This means that today we're able to export our vulnerabilities through Seraph and various other formats that enable us to integrate with various third parties that can do some of the process. We also work on tooling and enhancements to the existing tool set to make sure that we can support that business logic so that we can actually deduplicate, analyze, and focus on the vulnerabilities that matter at a particular point. So the solution, I mentioned, Seraph exportation, integration with third parties, and amalgamating the results between every single tool. Industry landscape. So just to finish off, if we look at the application security industry, it's not just about the tooling. It's really important that you have the technology and the engines that find you the right vulnerabilities that you can trust automatically through automation and integration. But the industry itself talks about the process, the DevSecOps frameworks, and the automation that's at the core. At PT, we focus diligently on, first of all, reducing the false positives, again, to trust vulnerabilities through an automation, through integration with no manual inputs. And we're looking at growing the expertise and really growing the industry as a whole to really make sure the process becomes as seamless as possible to every single party involved around application security. Thank you so much. You will find my contact details in the description of this video. I'm going to be looking throughout the comments. If you have any questions, I'm going to be looking through those. Happy to have a conversation. We also have a form in the description section that you can fill out to give your feedback and leave your contact details for us to have a conversation further. Please also like and subscribe, and have an amazing day.